Darian Stone's pen hovered over my performance review for what felt like an eternity, before he finally looked up with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Crystal, you know I'd love to approve this raise, but with my divorce proceedings, well, every dollar counts right now." What he didn't know was that his ex-wife Leila had been watching his financial manipulation from the sidelines, and she was about to make him an offer he couldn't refuse, except it wouldn't be to him. I'm Crystal Shaw, and this is the story of how my manager's greed during his messy divorce cost him everything, while his ex-wife and I built an empire from the ashes of his broken promises. If you've ever been told there's no money in the budget, while watching your boss spend company funds on personal legal fees, this story will hit differently. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Darian Stone's corner office buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I sat across from his mahogany desk, my portfolio of achievements spread between us like evidence in a courtroom. 6 months of documented success stories, client testimonials, and revenue reports that painted a picture so clear even a blind person could see my value to Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. "So," Darian said, his fingers drumming against the desk in a rhythm that matched my accelerating heartbeat, "you're asking for a 20% raise." He didn't look up from the papers, his salt and pepper hair catching the harsh office lighting as he continued that infuriating drumming. The same fingers that had been scrolling through luxury vacation rentals on his computer screen just minutes before I'd knocked on his door. "Based on performance metrics, yes," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. The Hartwell campaign alone brought in 40% more revenue than projected. The Morrison account that everyone said was impossible to land? I closed it in 3 weeks. And the digital strategy I developed for, "I'm familiar with your work, Crystal." His voice carried that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise over the past 2 years. The same tone he used when explaining why women were naturally better at handling the emotional clients, while assigning me every difficult account that walked through our doors. I leaned forward, unable to contain my frustration any longer. "Then you know this raise is more than justified. I've consistently exceeded every target you've set, brought in over $2 million in new business this quarter alone, and somehow managed to turn 3 of our most problematic clients into our biggest advocates." Darian finally looked up, and that's when I saw it, that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. The same smile he'd worn during every empty promise, every hollow compliment, every moment he'd made me feel like I was lucky just to have a job at his company. "Crystal, you know I'd love to approve this raise," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You're a valuable member of our team, really, but with my divorce proceedings, well, every dollar counts right now." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, stunned, processing what he'd just said. My raise, the recognition I'd earned through months of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and sacrificed weekends, was being denied so he could afford his divorce lawyer. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you just say my raise depends on your personal legal expenses?" Darian had the audacity to look sheepish, like a student caught cheating on an exam. "Look, it's temporary. Once the divorce is finalized, we can revisit this, but right now, I need to keep overhead low. You understand, right? It's just business. Just business." The phrase echoed in my mind as I stared at him, this man who made 3 times my salary while I did the work that kept his department profitable. The same man who'd just returned from a weekend in the Hamptons, documented extensively on his social media, while claiming poverty when it came to compensating his employees fairly. "How is your personal divorce just business?" I asked, my voice gaining strength with each word. "How is my career advancement contingent on your marriage failing?" Darian's facade began to crack. His smile faltered, and I caught a glimpse of the entitled, desperate man underneath. "Listen, Crystal, I know this isn't ideal, but—" "Ideal?" I stood up, gathering my portfolio with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated rage. "Darian, I brought in more revenue last quarter than any other account manager in this company's history. I've been offered positions at 3 different agencies in the past 6 months, all with significantly higher salaries than what I'm making here. That got his attention. His drumming fingers stopped, and for the first time in our conversation, he looked genuinely concerned. "You've been interviewing elsewhere?" "I haven't needed to," I said, meeting his gaze directly. I believed in loyalty. I believed that hard work and results would speak for themselves. I believed that this company valued its employees enough to compensate them fairly. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the buzzing fluorescent lights and the distant sound of phones ringing in the bullpen outside his office. Through his glass walls, I could see my colleagues hunched over their desks, probably wondering what was taking so long in what should have been a routine performance review. "Look," Darian said finally, his voice taking on a conciliatory tone that fooled neither of us. "Maybe we can work something out. A small increase now, more later when things settle down. 5% perhaps?" 5%. After everything I'd accomplished, after all the revenue I'd generated, after being the backbone of his department's success, he was offering me 5%, while openly admitting he was using company resources to subsidize his personal legal battles. "No," I said quietly. "No?" He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "No," I repeated, louder this time. 5% is an insult. 20% is what I earned, and it's what I deserve. But more than that, Darian, this conversation has shown me something I should have seen months ago." I stood up, my portfolio clutched against my chest like armor. "You don't see me as a valuable employee. You see me as a resource to be exploited while you fund your personal drama, while I'm done being your cash cow while you cry poverty." Darian's face flushed red, and I saw a flash of the anger he usually reserved for closed-door phone calls with his attorney. "Now hold on just a minute, Crystal. You're being emotional about this. Let's think rationally." "Emotional?" I laughed, and the sound was sharper than I'd intended. "Darian, what's emotional is denying your employees earned raise because you can't manage your personal finances. What's emotional is expecting me to subsidize your failed marriage." I walked toward his office door, then turned back one final time. "And for the record, those job offers I mentioned? I'm going to start returning some calls." As I reached for the door handle, I heard him call after me, his voice now carrying a note of panic. "Crystal, wait. Let's not be hasty here. Maybe we can find some middle ground." But I was already walking out, my heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythm that sounded surprisingly like freedom. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, his voice growing more desperate with each repetition. Lesov. I didn't look back. Lesov. I should probably introduce myself properly. I'm Crystal Shaw, 31 years old, and until that moment in Darian's office, I was the senior account manager at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions in downtown Portland, Oregon. The kind of woman who color codes her calendar, responds to emails within 20 minutes, and has never missed a deadline in 7 years of working in marketing. I'm also the person who brings homemade cookies to the office on someone's birthday, stays late to help colleagues with their presentations, and genuinely believed that excellence would eventually be rewarded. Looking back now, I realize how naive that sounds, but at the time it felt like the right way to build a career. My parents raised me with old-school values: work hard, be reliable, treat people with respect, and good things will come. Dad spent 38 years as a machinist at the same factory, gradually working his way up from floor worker to shift supervisor. Mom taught elementary school for 27 years, touching hundreds of lives while barely making enough to support our family. They were the kind of people who believed in the system, who trusted that dedication and integrity would be recognized and rewarded. That belief system served me well through college, where I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in marketing and communications from Oregon State University. It carried me through my first job at a small boutique agency, where I learned the fundamentals of account management while earning barely enough to cover my student loans, and a studio apartment that was generous to call cozy. But I was learning, growing, and building a foundation that I thought would support a successful career. When I landed the position at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions 3 years ago, I felt like I'd finally made it to the big leagues. Pinnacle was a mid-sized agency with blue-chip clients, a sleek downtown office, and the kind of reputation that opened doors in Portland's competitive marketing scene. During my interview, Darian painted a picture of growth opportunities, mentorship, and a merit-based advancement system that rewarded results over politics. "We're looking for someone who can hit the ground running," he'd said, his smile warm and genuine, in a way that now seems laughable. "Someone who's not afraid of challenges and wants to build something meaningful with a dynamic team." I believed every word. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My role at Pinnacle started as account manager, handling mid-tier clients and supporting the senior team on larger accounts. I threw myself into the work with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved what they did. Marketing at its best is about storytelling, helping brands connect with people in meaningful ways. When I developed a campaign that increased a local restaurant chain's foot traffic by 45%, I felt like I was making a real difference. Darian seemed impressed with my work ethic and results. Within 6 months, I was promoted to senior account manager and given my own roster of clients. The promotion came with a modest salary increase and significantly more responsibility, but I was grateful for the opportunity to prove myself on a larger stage. That's when I began to notice the pattern that would define my experience at Pinnacle. While my male colleagues handled accounts with similar budgets and complexity, I consistently found myself assigned the difficult clients, the ones who'd burned through multiple account managers, who had impossible deadlines, or who required extensive handholding. Darian would frame these assignments as opportunities. "Crystal, you have such a natural ability to manage challenging personalities. This client specifically requested someone who could handle their unique needs." What he meant was that I was willing to work twice as hard for the same recognition, and I was too professional to complain when clients crossed boundaries that my male colleagues wouldn't tolerate. When the CEO of one of our major accounts decided that all our meetings needed to happen over expensive dinners where he could get to know the team better, guess who became the primary point of contact? When another client demanded weekend availability for urgent requests that turned out to be minor copy changes, who do you think got that assignment? I handled it all with grace and professionalism, telling myself that this was the price of building a reputation in a competitive industry. I documented every success, tracked every metric, and built portfolios of case studies that demonstrated real, measurable value for our clients and our agency. The Hartwell campaign I mentioned to Darian was a perfect example. Hartwell Industries was a manufacturing company that had been hemorrhaging market share to competitors, with more modern branding and digital presence. They came to us as a last resort, with a limited budget and 3 months to turn things around before their board considered selling the company. I spent weeks immersing myself in their industry, talking to their employees, understanding their customer base, and identifying what made them unique in a crowded marketplace. The campaign I developed didn't just meet their goals, it exceeded them by nearly 50%. Their website traffic increased by 300%, qualified leads doubled, and most importantly, they retained their independence and started growing again. Darian took credit for the strategic direction during client presentations, while I did the actual work and managed every detail of the execution. When Hartwell's CEO sent a glowing testimonial praising the innovative strategy that saved their company, Darian forwarded it to the entire team, with a note taking full credit for the campaign's success. I told myself it didn't matter. The important thing was that the client was happy, the agency was profitable, and I was gaining valuable experience. I believed that eventually, my contributions would be recognized and rewarded appropriately. And Flutter, how wrong I was. 3 years ago, when I first walked into the gleaming lobby of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, I felt like I was stepping into my future. The office occupied 2 floors of a renovated warehouse in Portland's trendy Pearl District, with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of open-concept workspace that screamed creative innovation. During my interview tour, Darian had proudly shown me the collaboration spaces, the fully stocked kitchen, and the rooftop terrace, where the team supposedly held brainstorming sessions with views of Mount Hood. "We're not just an agency," he'd told me that first day, his hand gesturing expansively toward the bustling workspace. "We're a family. Everyone here has a voice. Everyone contributes to our success, and everyone shares in our growth." Those words resonated with me deeply. Coming from a smaller boutique agency where I'd hit a ceiling after 2 years, Pinnacle felt like the place where I could finally build the career I'd dreamed of since college. The salary offer was 30% higher than what I'd been making. The benefits package included professional development opportunities, and Darian had specifically mentioned a clear path to promotion for high performers. "I see you potentially leading your own team within 18 months, he'd said during my final interview, his confidence infectious. "Maybe even considering a partnership track if everything goes as well as I expect it will." Partnership track. Those words echoed in my mind for weeks after I accepted the position. My first 6 months at Pinnacle were everything I'd hoped they would be. I was assigned to work with Orion Vance, a senior account director who actually seemed invested in mentoring new team members. Orion taught me the intricacies of managing larger clients, showed me how to navigate the political dynamics that exist in every agency, and always made sure I received credit for my contributions during client meetings. "The key to long-term success," Orion told me during one of our weekly check-ins, "is building relationships based on trust and consistently delivering more value than expected. Do that, and advancement takes care of itself." Under Orion's guidance, I flourished. The restaurant chain campaign that increased foot traffic by 45% happened during this period, and I was able to present the results directly to the client with Orion's encouragement. When the client sent a thank you note specifically praising my strategic thinking and attention to detail, Orion made sure it went into my personnel file. But then Orion left. He'd been recruited by a larger agency in Seattle, offered a creative director position that represented a significant step up in his career. I was genuinely happy for him, but I also felt like I was losing the one person at Pinnacle who truly understood my potential. "Don't worry," Darian assured me during our transition meeting. "I'll be taking over Orion's mentorship role personally. This is actually a great opportunity for you to work more closely with senior leadership." That's when everything began to change. Without Orion's protective influence, Darian's true management style became apparent. Where Orion had encouraged collaboration and shared credit, Darian operated from a scarcity mindset that viewed every team member's success as a potential threat to his own position. He began assigning me increasingly challenging accounts while framing the additional workload as growth opportunities. The Morrison account was the first red flag I should have recognized. Morrison Electronics was a regional retailer that had burned through 4 different agencies in 2 years. Their marketing director, Keith Morrison, was notorious for last-minute changes, impossible deadlines, and a tendency to berate agency staff during meetings. The account was profitable enough that no one wanted to lose it, but toxic enough that no one wanted to manage it. "Crystal," Darian had said, calling me into his office 6 months after Orion's departure, "I have an exciting opportunity for you. Morrison Electronics specifically requested someone with your skill set. They've heard about your work with challenging timelines and think you'd be perfect for their upcoming product launch." I should have asked why they'd specifically requested someone with experience in challenging timelines, rather than simply asking for our best strategist. Instead, I was flattered by what I interpreted as recognition of my problem-solving abilities. Managing the Morrison account meant working 60-hour weeks as standard, being available for urgent calls on weekends, and enduring Keith Morrison's verbal abuse during weekly status meetings. When I successfully launched their holiday campaign, which generated a 48% increase in online sales, Keith grudgingly admitted it was acceptable work. Darian, however, positioned the Morrison's success as evidence of Pinnacle's senior leadership capabilities during his quarterly presentation to the board. When I asked about receiving credit for the campaign results, he told me that individual recognition wasn't part of Pinnacle's collaborative culture. "We succeed as a team here, Crystal," he'd said with that patronizing smile. "Taking personal credit for wins would go against everything we believe in." Yet somehow, when things went wrong, individual accountability suddenly became very important. The pattern solidified over the following year. I was systematically assigned the most difficult clients, the tightest deadlines, and the smallest budgets. while my male colleagues handled prestigious accounts with reasonable clients and generous timelines. When I exceeded expectations, which I almost always did, the success belonged to the team. When projects faced challenges, the responsibility fell squarely on my shoulders. My personal life began to erode under the pressure. I missed my best friend's wedding because of a Morrison emergency that turned out to be a minor logo adjustment. I canceled 3 family dinners in a row to accommodate last-minute client demands. I stopped dating entirely because I couldn't guarantee availability for plans made more than 24 hours in advance. The promised promotion to team lead never materialized, despite my consistently excellent performance reviews. When I asked Darian about advancement opportunities during my annual review, he explained that the company was restructuring and that leadership roles were on hold for the foreseeable future. Yet somehow he found budget to hire his former fraternity brother as a senior creative director at a salary that I later learned was 20% higher than what I was making, despite having half my experience and none of my client management skills. But I persevered, telling myself that building a strong reputation took time and that my hard work would eventually be recognized. I documented every success, saved every client testimonial, and continued believing that merit would ultimately triumph over politics. The 20% raise I'd requested wasn't greed. It was market correction for someone who had become indispensable while being systematically undervalued. I just never imagined that Darian's personal financial crisis would become the excuse for denying what I'd earned. The incident that finally opened my eyes to Darian's true nature happened 4 months before that fateful performance review meeting. It involved Meridian Technologies, a tech startup that had approached Pinnacle with what seemed like an impossible challenge. They needed to completely rebrand and launch a nationwide marketing campaign in 8 weeks, with a budget that most agencies would consider inadequate for a local campaign. Meridian's CEO, Gwenor Wild, had built her company from a garage startup to a promising AI software platform, but she was facing a crisis. A larger competitor had just launched a similar product with massive marketing backing, and Meridian was at risk of being completely overshadowed before they could establish their market presence. They needed something bold, innovative, and cost-effective. Exactly the kind of challenge that got my strategic mind racing. During the initial client meeting, I watched Darian struggle to even understand Meridian's core technology, let alone how to position it in a crowded marketplace. He threw around generic marketing buzzwords while Gwenor grew visibly frustrated with his superficial grasp of her business challenges. "What we need," Gwenor said, her voice sharp with impatience, "is someone who understands that we're not just selling software. We're selling a fundamental shift in how businesses approach data analysis. The company that figures out how to communicate that story effectively will dominate this space." I found myself leaning forward, my mind already spinning with possibilities. What if we positioned Meridian not as another AI company, but as the democratization of data intelligence? I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop myself. Instead of competing on technical specifications, we tell the story of how your platform gives small businesses the same analytical power that Fortune 500 companies pay millions for. Gwenor's eyes lit up. Exactly. That's exactly what I've been trying to articulate. Darian shot me a warning look. I wasn't supposed to speak during initial client meetings without his permission, but Gwenor was already engaged. "Tell me more about this approach." What followed was an impromptu strategy session where I outlined a campaign concept I'd been developing in my head, the David strategy. Instead of trying to outspend the corporate giants, Meridian would position itself as the scrappy innovator helping underdogs level the playing field. Every piece of marketing would reinforce the narrative that choosing Meridian wasn't just a business decision, it was taking a stand for innovation over intimidation. By the end of the meeting, Gwenor was practically bouncing in her chair with excitement. "This is brilliant. When can you start?" Darian, who had contributed nothing to the strategic discussion, smoothly inserted himself back into the conversation. "We'll have a full proposal to you by Friday," he said, as if the entire concept had been his idea. That night, I went home energized in a way I hadn't felt in months. I spent the weekend developing the David strategy into a comprehensive campaign framework. I researched Meridian's competitors, analyzed their messaging approaches, and identified specific opportunities where a smaller, more agile company could outmaneuver larger rivals through superior storytelling and authentic connection with their target market. The strategy included a viral social media component called David versus Data Goliath, where Meridian would showcase real small businesses using their platform to achieve results previously available only to massive corporations. Instead of expensive traditional advertising, we'd create a content series following actual customers as they transformed their operations using Meridian's tools. I crafted messaging frameworks, developed visual concepts, and even wrote sample content that demonstrated how every piece of communication would reinforce the central narrative. I documented everything meticulously, creating a 60-page strategic brief that outlined not just what we would do, but why each element would resonate with Meridian's target audience. Monday morning, I arrived early to put the finishing touches on the presentation. I'd planned to walk through the strategy with Darian before our afternoon client meeting, ensuring he understood every component so we could present as a unified team. Instead, I found him in the conference room with our graphic designer, Sam Thorne, rehearsing a presentation that looked remarkably familiar. The David strategy represents a fundamental shift in how emerging technology companies can compete, Darian was saying, reading directly from my strategic brief. Instead of engaging in expensive feature wars, we focus on narrative differentiation that positions Meridian as the democratizing force in data intelligence. He was using my exact words, my strategic framework, even my specific examples, all while presenting it as his own innovative thinking. I stood in the doorway, invisible to both of them, listening to my weekend's work being rehearsed by someone who hadn't contributed a single original idea to its development. When Sam asked a clarifying question about the social media component, Darian stumbled, clearly unfamiliar with the details of the strategy he was claiming to have created. "We'll refine those details as we move into execution," he said dismissively, the kind of non-answer that revealed his superficial understanding of the work. The client presentation that afternoon was a masterclass in theft. Darian delivered my strategy with the confidence of someone who'd spent months developing it, while I sat silently beside him, occasionally called upon to answer technical questions about implementation details. When Gwenor praised the innovative approach and strategic thinking, Darian accepted the compliments with practiced humility. "This is exactly the kind of breakthrough thinking that sets Pinnacle apart," he said, somehow managing to sound both modest and self-congratulatory. "It's why I personally took on this project. I knew Meridian deserved our most innovative strategic approach." Meridian signed with us that day largely based on enthusiasm for Darian's strategy. The retainer was substantial enough to significantly impact our quarterly revenue, and when the campaign launched 6 weeks later, it exceeded every performance metric we'd established. The David versus Data Goliath social media series went viral within the first week, generating over 2 million impressions and leading to a 40% increase in qualified leads for Meridian. Industry publications wrote case studies about the campaign's innovative approach to competitive positioning. Marketing blogs dissected the strategy as an example of how smaller companies could outmaneuver larger competitors through superior storytelling. Darian was invited to speak at 3 different marketing conferences about his, quote, breakthrough approach to underdog brand positioning. He was featured in Portland Business Journal as an innovative marketing leader and received a standing ovation when he presented the Meridian case study at the Pacific Northwest Marketing Association's annual summit. I received a company-wide email thanking me for my valuable support during the execution phase of the campaign. That's when I realized that my contributions would never be fairly recognized at Pinnacle, no matter how innovative, how successful, or how crucial they were to our clients' success. I was being systematically relegated to the role of invisible genius while Darian built his reputation on my strategic thinking. The 20% raise I'd requested 4 months later wasn't just about money. It was about finally receiving compensation that reflected my true value to the company. Value that Darian had been monetizing for his own benefit while keeping me trapped in a role that undervalued my contributions by design. The Meridian Technologies theft should have been my wake-up call, but I was still operating under the naive belief that it was an aberration, a moment of poor judgment rather than a systematic approach to leadership. I told myself that Darian had simply gotten caught up in the excitement of the presentation and would eventually acknowledge my contribution privately, even if he couldn't do so publicly. I was wrong. Maite. Over the following months, I began to notice a pattern that was so consistent it could have been a business strategy. Every significant innovation, every breakthrough solution, every client win that originated from my strategic thinking somehow became another example of Darian's visionary leadership, while I remained invisible in the background. The Cascade Hospitality campaign was the second major red flag. Cascade owned a chain of boutique hotels throughout the Pacific Northwest, and they were struggling to differentiate themselves in an increasingly crowded luxury travel market. Their occupancy rates had dropped 15% over 2 years, and they were losing ground to both large hotel chains and vacation rental platforms. I spent 3 weeks developing what I called the local insider strategy, a comprehensive approach that would position each Cascade property not just as a hotel, but as a gateway to authentic local experiences. Instead of competing on amenities that could be replicated anywhere, we would leverage each location's unique cultural and geographic advantages. The strategy included partnerships with local artisans, exclusive access to hidden gems that only locals knew about, and a content marketing approach that would make guests feel like they were being welcomed into a community rather than simply checking into a room. I researched each property's location, identified unique local partnerships, and created detailed implementation plans that would transform how guests experienced their stays. During our strategy presentation, I watched Darian present my local insider framework as his own innovation, complete with specific examples I'd researched and documented. When the client asked about the inspiration behind the strategy, he told a story about his own travels and how he'd always wished hotels could provide more authentic local connections. The campaign launched 6 months later and was immediately successful. Occupancy rates increased by 28%, average stay duration rose by 2 days, and guest satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Travel blogs wrote features about Cascade's revolutionary approach to hospitality, and the hotel chain's CEO credited the campaign with saving several properties from potential closure. Darian was invited to speak at the Pacific Northwest Tourism Conference about his groundbreaking insights into experiential travel marketing. I watched from my desk as he practiced his presentation, using PowerPoint slides that contained my strategic frameworks and implementation plans, presented as his original thinking. The third incident involved Sterling Financial, a regional credit union that was losing market share to both traditional banks and fintech startups. They needed to modernize their brand without alienating their existing customer base, a delicate balance that required understanding both generational preferences and financial services regulations. I developed the Trust Bridge strategy, a positioning approach that would present Sterling as the perfect combination of traditional stability and modern innovation. The campaign would highlight how Sterling offered the personal service of a community bank with the technological convenience of a modern financial platform. The research phase alone took me 6 weeks of evenings and weekends. I studied demographic data, analyzed competitor messaging, conducted informal focus groups with Sterling's existing customers, and developed messaging frameworks that would resonate with both baby boomers who valued personal relationships and millennials who demanded digital convenience. Once again, I watched Darian present my strategy as his own breakthrough thinking. When Sterling's board of directors praised the innovative approach during our final presentation, Darian accepted their compliments with the confidence of someone who'd developed every element personally. The Sterling campaign became another massive success. New account openings increased by 45%, customer retention improved by 30%, and Sterling was recognized by the Oregon Credit Union League as Innovator of the Year for their marketing approach. At the award ceremony, Darian gave an acceptance speech about the importance of thinking outside traditional financial services marketing, and how his strategic vision had transformed Sterling's competitive position. I wasn't even invited to attend the ceremony. But it wasn't just the big campaigns. The pattern extended to smaller innovations, daily strategic insights, and even solutions to operational challenges within our own agency. When I developed a project management system that reduced campaign delivery times by 20%, Darian presented it to senior leadership as his efficiency improvement initiative. When I created a client retention protocol that decreased account churn by 30%, it became another example of his proactive leadership. I started keeping detailed records of these incidents, not initially for any strategic purpose, but because I needed to maintain my own sanity. I documented the original ideas, saved email threads that proved my contributions, and kept copies of strategic briefs and presentation materials that demonstrated my role in developing successful campaigns. What emerged from this documentation was a clear pattern. Over 18 months, I had been the primary strategic architect behind campaigns that generated over $8 million in new revenue for Pinnacle. My innovations had directly contributed to client retention, new business development, and operational efficiency improvements that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. In return, I received standard annual raises that barely kept pace with inflation, while Darian received performance bonuses that exceeded my entire annual salary. His reputation as an innovative strategic thinker was built entirely on work I had created, and his speaking engagements and industry recognition were based on presenting my ideas as his original thinking. The most frustrating part wasn't even the credit theft. It was watching him struggle when clients asked detailed questions about implementation or wanted to explore advanced strategic applications of the frameworks I'd developed. During client meetings, I found myself subtly feeding him answers or redirecting conversations when his superficial understanding of the strategies became apparent. I was enabling my own exploitation, covering for his incompetence while he built a career on my creativity. The breaking point in my awareness came during a team meeting where Darian announced that Pinnacle had been selected as a finalist for the Portland Business Journal's Marketing Agency of the Year award. As he listed the campaigns that had earned us the nomination, I realized I had been the primary strategic architect behind every single project he mentioned: Meridian Technologies, Cascade Hospitality, Sterling Financial. 3 smaller campaigns that had generated significant industry attention, all of them based on strategies I had developed, research I had conducted, and innovations I had created during my own time. This recognition reflects the caliber of strategic thinking that defines Pinnacle's approach, Darian said, his voice filled with pride. It's what happens when visionary leadership meets exceptional execution. I sat in that meeting, surrounded by colleagues who had no idea that the visionary leadership he referenced was actually my strategic thinking being systematically appropriated. And I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not anger, something deeper and more dangerous. Clarity. I finally understood that this wasn't going to change. Darian wasn't going to suddenly develop a conscience and start sharing credit. He wasn't going to recognize my contributions or compensate me fairly for the value I created. His entire leadership style was built on taking credit for other people's work, while keeping them trapped in positions where they couldn't challenge his authority. That's when I started planning my exit strategy, though I didn't realize it at the time. The night after my disastrous performance review with Darian, I sat in my downtown Portland apartments, staring at the city lights through rain-streaked windows, replaying his words over and over again. With my divorce proceedings, every dollar counts right now. The audacity of using his personal financial crisis as justification for denying my earned raise felt like a violation that went beyond typical workplace unfairness. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I found myself at my laptop at 2 a.m., doing something I should have done months earlier, researching my actual market value. What I discovered was both validating and infuriating. According to Glassdoor, PayScale, and industry salary surveys, senior account managers with my experience and track record in Portland's marketing scene were earning between $78,000 and $95,000 annually. I was making $62,000. Account directors, a position I should have been promoted 2 years ago, commanded salaries between $95,000 and $120,000, plus performance bonuses and equity participation. I had been systematically underpaid by at least $20,000 annually, and the 20% raise I'd requested would have only brought me to the lower end of market rate for my actual responsibilities and contributions. But the salary research was just the beginning of my revelation. I spent the next week diving deeper into industry data, and what I found painted a picture of just how valuable I'd become without realizing it. Senior marketing professionals with demonstrable track records of generating 8-figure revenue growth weren't just employable, they were being actively recruited by agencies desperate for proven talent. I created a LinkedIn profile audit and was shocked to discover I'd received 17 connection requests from recruiters in the past 6 months alone. Messages I'd ignored because I'd been focused on building my career at Pinnacle. When I finally started responding to some of these outreach attempts, the conversations were eye-opening. "Crystal, I've been following your career trajectory," wrote Astria Sterling, a recruiter specializing in senior marketing roles. "The campaigns associated with your LinkedIn profile show exactly the kind of strategic thinking our clients are seeking. Would you be open to a confidential conversation about opportunities that might align with your expertise?" Campaigns associated with my profile. That phrase stuck with me, because while Darian had been presenting my work as his own in industry settings, I had been quietly documenting my actual contributions on LinkedIn, backed up by client testimonials and measurable results that couldn't be disputed. I started systematically reviewing the documentation I'd been collecting over the past 18 months. What had begun as a personal record-keeping habit had evolved into something much more powerful. An ironclad portfolio of my strategic contributions that could be verified through client testimonials, campaign results, and industry recognition. The Meridian Technologies case study was particularly compelling. I had saved every email exchange with Gunnar Wild, including her specific praise for the strategic framework I'd developed. "The David strategy approach is exactly the breakthrough thinking we needed," she'd written after the campaign launch. "Crystal's insight into competitive positioning transformed how we think about our market presence. More importantly, I had the original strategic brief I'd developed, complete with timestamps and version history, that predated any involvement from Darian. I could prove, through documentation and client communications, that I had been the architect of every major strategic element that made the campaign successful. The same pattern held for Cascade Hospitality and Sterling Financial. Client emails praising specific strategic insights, original research documents that I'd created, and measurable results that demonstrated the direct impact of my innovations. I had been building a portfolio of provable achievements without even realizing it. But my most significant discovery came when I started researching Pinnacle's competitive landscape and client relationships. I learned that 3 of our major clients, Meridian, Cascade, and Sterling, had been approached by competing agencies over the past year. In each case, they had declined to switch specifically because of their satisfaction with the strategic work being done on their accounts. Work that I had been doing even though they believed it was coming from Darian. More intriguingly, I discovered that Torvin & Associates, Pinnacle's primary competitor in the Portland market, had been struggling to land major tech and hospitality clients precisely because they lacked the kind of innovative strategic thinking that had become Pinnacle's differentiator. That strategic thinking was mine. I found myself on Torvin & Associates' website at 3 a.m. reading about their client roster and service offerings. They represented major brands, offered significantly higher compensation packages, and, most importantly, they had a reputation for promoting talent based on merit rather than politics. Their About page included a quote from founding partner Kelvin Reed that stopped me cold. "We believe the best ideas come from empowering individual creativity rather than claiming credit for collaborative work. Every strategist at Torvin & Associates receives recognition and compensation that reflects their actual contributions to client success." It was as if he was speaking directly to my situation. I spent the following weekend conducting what I privately called competitive intelligence research, though it felt more like mapping an escape route. I learned that Torvin & Associates had been actively recruiting senior talent from competing agencies, offering not just higher salaries but also equity participation and creative credit agreements that protected individual contributions. They were also expanding their service offerings into exactly the areas where I had developed the most expertise: tech startup marketing and experiential hospitality campaigns. On Sunday evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I opened my laptop and began drafting a document I titled Strategic Portfolio Documented Contributions 2021 to 2024. What emerged over the next 4 hours was a comprehensive case study of my actual value to Pinnacle's success. The document included original strategic briefs with timestamps proving my authorship, client email testimonials praising specific strategic insights, revenue attribution showing $8.2 million in directly traceable new business, campaign performance metrics demonstrating consistent outperformance of industry benchmarks, documentation of operational improvements I'd developed that saved Pinnacle over $200,000 annually. Most importantly, I included a market analysis showing what my strategic capabilities would be worth to a competing agency. Based on industry standards for revenue generation and client retention, my documented contributions represented a market value between $120,000 and $150,000 annually, plus performance incentives. I was being paid $62,000. As I finalized the document, I realized something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. I hadn't just been underpaid and undervalued. I had been systematically exploited to subsidize Darian's career advancement, while my own potential was deliberately suppressed. But more importantly, I now had proof of my actual worth, documentation of my strategic capabilities, and evidence that the competitive market would value my contributions at more than double my current compensation. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something I hadn't experienced at Pinnacle Power. I saved the document, backed it up to 3 different locations, and began researching how to initiate confidential conversations with competing agencies without violating any employment agreements. The raise Darian had denied me wasn't just about money, it was about finally receiving recognition for value I'd been creating all along. Value that I now realized I could take elsewhere, along with the strategic capabilities that had made Pinnacle successful. The only question remaining was whether I had the courage to act on what I'd discovered. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of persistent Portland drizzle that perfectly matched my mood as I sat at my desk, staring at an email that had arrived at 6:47 a.m. The sender was Kelvin Reed from Torvin & Associates, and the subject line read, "Confidential discussion, strategic leadership opportunity." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the message. "Crystal, I hope this email finds you well. I've been following your career trajectory through industry publications and LinkedIn, and I'm particularly impressed by the innovative strategic work associated with the Meridian Technologies and Cascade Hospitality campaigns. Would you be available for a confidential coffee meeting this week to discuss a senior strategic leadership position that I believe would align perfectly with your expertise? The role offers significant advancement opportunities and compensation commensurate with your demonstrated value creation. Best regards, Kelvin Reed, Managing Partner, Torvin & Associates." I read the email 3 times, my heart racing with each pass. This wasn't a generic recruiter outreach. Kelvin had specifically referenced my work and was offering to discuss a senior leadership position. The timing felt almost supernatural, arriving less than a week after my devastating meeting with Darian. I spent the next 2 hours crafting and recrafting my response, trying to strike the right balance between professional interest and appropriate caution. "Kelvin, thank you for reaching out. I would be interested in a confidential discussion about strategic leadership opportunities. I'm available for coffee Thursday afternoon if that works with your schedule. Best, Crystal Shaw?" I hit send before I could second-guess myself further. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I chose a small coffee shop in the Alberta Arts District, far enough from downtown that we wouldn't risk running into anyone from Pinnacle. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordering a lavender latte and selecting a corner table where we could speak privately. Kelvin Reed was exactly what I'd expected from his company's website. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed but approachable, with the kind of confident energy that suggested someone who'd built his success through merit rather than politics. He greeted me with a warm smile and genuine enthusiasm that immediately put me at ease. "Crystal, thank you for meeting with me," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I have to tell you, what you've accomplished at Pinnacle has been remarkable to watch from the outside. The strategic thinking behind those campaigns represents exactly the kind of innovative approach that defines successful agencies in today's market." I felt a flush of validation that I hadn't experienced in years. Here was a respected industry leader discussing my work with the kind of recognition that Darian had never provided. "I appreciate that," I replied carefully. Though I should mention that those campaigns were collaborative efforts with my team at Pinnacle. Kelvin smiled knowingly. "Crystal, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I know the difference between collaborative work and individual strategic brilliance. The frameworks you developed for competitive positioning and experiential marketing are sophisticated enough that they could be taught as case studies in business schools." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Which is why I'm curious about your current situation. Based on your track record, you should be leading your own strategic team and receiving compensation that reflects your actual contributions to agency success." The directness of his observation caught me off guard. What makes you think I'm not? Because talented strategists who are properly valued and compensated don't typically respond to unsolicited recruitment emails within 2 hours, he said with a gentle smile. And because I've heard through industry channels that Pinnacle's recent success has been driven by strategic work that doesn't match Darian Stone's historical capabilities. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, embarrassed by how transparent my situation apparently was to outside observers. Industry channels? Marketing is a small community in Portland, Kelvin explained. When agencies start consistently outperforming their historical benchmarks, people notice. When that outperformance coincides with new strategic approaches that represent a significant evolution from previous work, people talk. He paused, studying my reaction. I've also heard that Darian is going through a contentious divorce, which tends to create complications in professional settings. The mention of the divorce sent a chill through me. You know about that? Crystal, Darian's ex-wife Leila is a prominent business consultant in Portland. She's been building her own practice since their separation, and she's been very vocal about the challenges of rebuilding a career after supporting someone else's advancement for years. Kelvin's expression grew more serious. She's actually the one who suggested I reach out to you. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. I'm sorry, what? Leila Stone, well, she's going back to her maiden name, Leila Hayes, has been developing a business consulting practice focused on strategic planning for growth stage companies. She's looking for a marketing partner who understands innovative positioning strategies for emerging businesses. Kelvin smiled. When she mentioned that Pinnacle's recent strategic work reminded her of approaches she'd been discussing with potential clients, I asked if she knew who was actually developing those strategies. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Darian's ex-wife had been watching Pinnacle's work and had specifically recommended me to Torvin and Associates. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. She knows about my work? She knows more than that, Kelvin said, pulling out his phone. She asked me to share her direct contact information with you if you seemed interested in exploring opportunities outside Pinnacle. She mentioned something about understanding what it's like to have your contributions undervalued by someone who takes credit for collaborative success. He slid a business card across the table. Leila Hayes, Strategic Business Consulting. Empowering growth through authentic leadership. I stared at the card, my mind racing with possibilities I couldn't have imagined an hour earlier. What exactly is she proposing? A partnership, Kelvin said simply. Leila has been approached by several tech startups and hospitality companies that need exactly the kind of strategic marketing expertise you've demonstrated. Rather than referring them to established agencies, she's been considering building her own strategic marketing capability. He leaned back, giving me space to process what he was saying. She's also mentioned that she has detailed knowledge of Pinnacle's financial situation, client relationships, and operational challenges that might be illuminating for someone considering their career options. The implications hit me like a wave. Leila wasn't just offering a business opportunity, she was offering insider knowledge about Darian's vulnerabilities and Pinnacle's weaknesses. Knowledge that could be invaluable whether I stayed or left. What kind of compensation would this partnership involve? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Base salary of $95,000, with equity participation that could reach $150,000 annually, based on client acquisition and revenue generation, Kelvin replied. Plus, you'd be building your own strategic consulting practice, rather than just executing someone else's vision. The numbers were staggering, more than 50% higher than my current salary, with unlimited upside potential and actual ownership of my work. There's one more thing, Kelvin added, his voice dropping slightly. Leila mentioned that she has documentation related to the divorce proceedings that might be relevant to your situation at Pinnacle. She didn't elaborate, but she suggested that Darian's financial circumstances might be more complicated than they appear. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything I'd learned in the past 30 minutes. Not only was I being offered a career-changing opportunity, but Darian's ex-wife apparently had information that could provide leverage in whatever decision I made about my future. When would Leila want to meet? I asked finally. Kelvin smiled. She's available whenever you're ready. But Crystal, I should mention, timing might be important. She's heard through mutual connections that Pinnacle is facing some financial pressures beyond just Darian's personal situation. As I walked back to my car 20 minutes later, Leila's business card felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I had gone into that meeting looking for a career opportunity and discovered something much more complex. A chance to partner with someone who understood exactly what I'd been experiencing, and who might have the inside knowledge to help me take control of my professional future. The only question now was whether I had the courage to make the call. Leila Hayes' business card sat on my kitchen counter for exactly 36 hours before I finally found the courage to make the call. I'd rehearsed what I would say at least a dozen times, but when her warm, confident voice answered on the second ring, all my preparation evaporated. Leila Hayes. Hi, this is Crystal Shaw. Kelvin Reed gave me your contact information and suggested we might have some mutual interests to discuss. There was a pause, then a sound that might have been a satisfied smile. Crystal, I was hoping you'd call. I've been following your work at Pinnacle for quite some time. Would you be available to meet this evening? I think we have a lot to discuss, and frankly, timing might be more important than either of us initially realized. 2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from Leila Hayes in the elegant living room of her Pearl District condo, trying not to stare at the woman who had been married to Darian for 8 years. She was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the bitter, vengeful ex-wife I'd imagined, Leila was poised, intelligent, and radiated the kind of quiet confidence that comes from someone who's rebuilt themselves from the ground up. First, she said, pouring us each a glass of wine, I want you to know that what I'm about to share with you isn't motivated by revenge. It's motivated by justice, and by the belief that talented people shouldn't have their potential destroyed by other people's failures. She settled into the chair across from me, her expression serious but not unkind. Kelvin told you that I recommended you specifically. What he didn't mention is why I've been watching Pinnacle's recent work so closely. Leila reached for a leather portfolio on the coffee table between us. During our divorce proceedings, I had to provide detailed financial documentation of our household expenses and income sources. As part of that process, I gained access to information about Darian's professional activities that illuminated some things about his management style. She opened the portfolio and pulled out several documents. Did you know that Darian received performance bonuses totaling $180,000 last year, specifically tied to the revenue generation from the Meridian, Cascade, and Sterling campaigns? My wine glass stopped halfway to my lips. I had no idea the bonuses were that substantial. Meanwhile, Leila continued, according to his own financial disclosures, he claimed that retaining key talent required, quote, significant investment in compensation. Yet somehow you're being paid $62,000 annually for work that generated over $8 million in new revenue. The disparity was even more staggering when laid out so starkly. How do you know my salary? Because Darian complained extensively during our mediation sessions about how expensive his employees were becoming, Leila said with a dry smile. He specifically mentioned that you'd become demanding about compensation, and that he was concerned about your quote-quote unrealistic expectations regarding advancement. Heat rose to my face. He called me demanding? Among other things. Leila's expression softened. Crystal, I spent 8 years watching Darian take credit for other people's work. The difference is that I was complicit in it because I believed we were building something together. You don't have that excuse or that obligation. She pulled out another document. More importantly, I have access to information about Pinnacle's actual financial situation that might surprise you. The company isn't as stable as it appears, and Darian's personal financial pressures are creating some interesting vulnerabilities. What kind of vulnerabilities? Leila smiled, and for the first time I caught a glimpse of the steel beneath her polished exterior. The kind that create opportunities for people who are prepared to act strategically. She leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone of someone presenting a business proposal. Here's what I'm offering, Crystal. I have 3 clients ready to sign consulting contracts totaling over $400,000 in the first year. They need exactly the kind of strategic marketing expertise you've been developing at Pinnacle. I have the business development connections and client management experience. You have the strategic brilliance and execution capabilities. The numbers were staggering. 50-50 partnership? 60-40 in your favor for the first 2 years. Then 50-50 once we're fully established, Leila corrected. Your strategic capabilities are the foundation of what we're building. I'm providing startup capital, initial client relationships, and insider knowledge that will help us position ourselves advantageously in the market. I took a larger sip of wine, my mind racing with possibilities. What about non-compete clauses, client conflicts, all the legal complications? I've had my attorney review Pinnacle's standard employment contracts, Leila said, producing another document. Your agreement has several interesting gaps, including the fact that it doesn't specifically restrict you from serving clients in different industries or geographic markets than your current portfolio. She smiled again. Also, since my consulting practice was established before we even met, there's no question of client poaching or competitive interference. We'd simply be expanding services to meet existing client needs. The conversation continued for another hour, covering logistics, revenue projections, and operational structures. By the time I left Leila's condo at 10 p.m., I had a business plan, partnership agreement draft, and a timeline for launching Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting within 60 days. More importantly, I had something I'd never possessed at Pinnacle, a genuine partner who understood my value and was willing to build something based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Friday morning, I arrived at Pinnacle with a resignation letter in my purse and a phone number in my contacts for the attorney who would be reviewing my employment agreements. I had spent Thursday evening crafting my resignation, keeping it professional but clear about my reasons for leaving. Darian was in his office by 8 a.m., as usual, probably trying to get ahead of the work he'd been avoiding while dealing with his personal legal issues. I knocked on his doorframe and waited for his distracted, "Come in," before entering. "I need to speak with you about something important," I said, closing the door behind me. He looked up from his computer, probably expecting another conversation about campaign logistics or client demands. "What's up?" I placed my resignation letter on his desk. "I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice." The transformation in his expression was immediate and dramatic. He went from casual distraction to focused alarm in less than 3 seconds. "What? Crystal? What's this about?" "It's about pursuing an opportunity that better aligns with my career goals and compensation expectations," I said, maintaining the professional tone I'd rehearsed. Darian picked up the letter, scanning it quickly. "This is about the raise, isn't it? Look, I know I was a bit abrupt during our conversation, but we can work something out. Maybe I was too hasty about the budget constraints." "This isn't about one conversation, Darian. It's about a pattern of undervaluation that I no longer find acceptable." He stood up, moving around his desk in what I recognized as his, quote, crisis management mode. "Crystal, you're one of our most valuable team members. Losing you would be devastating for our client relationships. What would it take to keep you here?" The irony of being called valuable by someone who'd been systematically exploiting my contributions wasn't lost on me. It would take recognition and compensation that reflects my actual contributions to this company's success. It would take advancement opportunities and creative credit for the strategic work I've been doing. "Done," he said immediately. "Senior Strategic Director, 25% raise, your name on campaign presentations, whatever you need." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the confident leader I'd once admired, but a desperate man who had just realized that his success was walking out the door. "Darian, 6 months ago, that offer might have been enough, but this isn't just about money or titles anymore. Then what is it about?" "It's about working with people who value my contributions from the beginning, not just when they're about to lose them." I moved toward the door. "My resignation is effective 2 weeks from today. I'll complete all current projects and ensure a smooth transition for my accounts." "Where are you going?" he called after me, his voice carrying a note of panic. "Is it Torvin? Because I can match whatever they're offering." I paused at the door, considering whether to answer. Finally, I decided that honesty was the best gift I could give someone who had taught me the importance of protecting my own interests. "I'm starting my own consulting practice," I said, "with a partner who understands the value of authentic collaboration." As I walked back to my desk, I could hear Darian behind me, already on the phone with what sounded like an emergency call to HR. But for the first time in 3 years, his panic wasn't my problem to solve. I had 2 weeks to transition my accounts and begin building something that was entirely my own. 6 weeks after walking out of Pinnacle's offices for the last time, I stood in the sleek conference room of our new Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting headquarters, watching Gwenor Wild from Meridian Technologies review our campaign performance metrics with undisguised amazement. "These results are extraordinary," she said, her finger tracing the upward trend lines on our presentation screen. 47% increase in qualified leads, 32% improvement in conversion rates, and brand awareness metrics that exceed our most optimistic projections. Leila smiled from across the table. Crystal's strategic framework for market expansion builds naturally on the positioning work you experienced at Pinnacle, but with implementation capabilities that we can customize specifically for Meridian's evolving needs. I felt a rush of professional pride that had become familiar over the past month. The difference, I added, is that we can now iterate and improve the strategy in real time, rather than being constrained by agency bureaucracy and competing client priorities. Gwenor nodded enthusiastically. That agility is exactly what we need as we scale. Which brings me to the main reason for today's meeting. She paused, building dramatic tension. Meridian's board has approved a 12-month strategic consulting contract with Hayes Shaw. We're talking about a $380,000 engagement to guide our national expansion strategy. The number hit me like a physical force. $380,000. More than 6 times my annual salary at Pinnacle, for a single client contract that would span 1 year. Leila's expression remained professionally composed, but I caught the satisfied gleam in her eyes. "We're honored by your confidence," Leila replied smoothly. "Crystal, do you want to outline our preliminary approach to national market development?" For the next 45 minutes, I presented strategic frameworks that I'd been developing in my head for months, but had never been able to fully implement at Pinnacle. Market segmentation strategies, competitive positioning tactics, and scalable implementation protocols that represented the kind of innovative thinking I'd always been capable of, but had never been empowered to execute. When the meeting concluded and Gwenor left our offices, Leila and I sat in our conference room staring at each other in amazed silence. "Did that just happen?" I asked finally. "That," Leila said, opening a bottle of champagne she'd apparently been saving for exactly this moment, "was Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting landing its first major client. And it won't be our last." She was right. Over the following 3 weeks, we signed contracts with 2 additional clients, a boutique hotel chain that had heard about our work with Cascade Hospitality, and a fintech startup that specifically sought us out after reading about our innovative approach to competitive positioning. But the real validation came when Portland Business Journal published a feature article titled, "New Consulting Firm Poaches High-Profile Clients with Innovative Strategic Approach." The article included a photo of Leila and me in our office, identified me as former Pinnacle strategic architect Crystal Shaw, and specifically credited me with developing the frameworks that had made Meridian and Cascade's campaigns successful. Shaw's transition from agency employment to strategic consulting represents a growing trend among senior marketing professionals who want creative control and equitable compensation for their innovations, the article noted. Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting has already attracted 3 major clients in its first 2 months of operation, suggesting strong market demand for their collaborative approach to strategic development. Seeing my name in print, associated with my actual contributions, felt like finally being able to breathe after years of holding my breath. The industry response was immediate and overwhelming. Within a week of the article's publication, I received 17 LinkedIn connection requests from potential clients, 12 inquiries from other marketing professionals interested in joining our team, and 5 interview requests from trade publications wanting to discuss our business model. Most satisfying of all was the email from Astria Sterling, the recruiter who'd initially reached out months earlier. "Crystal, congratulations on your success with Hayes Shaw. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking our clients are seeking. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities to partner on larger enterprise consulting engagements?" Meanwhile, reports about Pinnacle's situation began filtering back through Portland's marketing community. Without the strategic capabilities that had defined their recent success, the agency was struggling to maintain the innovative reputation that had attracted new clients. I learned through mutual connections that Darian had attempted to recreate the frameworks I'd developed, But without understanding the strategic thinking behind them, his efforts had resulted in generic campaign approaches that lacked the sophisticated positioning that had made our original work effective. The Morrison Electronics account, which I'd managed for nearly 2 years, terminated their contract with Pinnacle after 3 months of subpar performance under new account management. Keith Morrison, never one to mince words, apparently told Darian that the agency's strategic capabilities had mysteriously evaporated, and that he was moving his business to, quote, consultants who actually understand our market challenges. Cascade Hospitality followed 2 weeks later, citing, quote, declining strategic innovation and, quote, campaign performance that no longer meets our growth objectives. When they approached Hayes Shaw about potentially resuming our strategic partnership, Leila and I exchanged looks across our conference table that contained equal parts satisfaction and sympathy. Interesting timing, Leila had said when we received Cascade's inquiry. Apparently they're experiencing some challenges with their current agency's strategic capabilities. We signed Cascade as our 4th major client the following week. But the most dramatic indicator of our success came during a chance encounter at a Portland Marketing Association networking event. I was discussing sustainable growth strategies with a group of startup founders when I noticed Darian across the room, looking noticeably older and more worn than he had just 3 months earlier. Our eyes met briefly, and he made his way over to our conversation circle with the kind of forced confidence that fooled no one. "Crystal," he said, his smile bright and artificial. "Congratulations on your new venture. I've been hearing great things about Hayes Shaw from industry colleagues." "Thank you," I replied evenly. "We've been fortunate to work with some exceptional clients." "I'm sure you have." His voice carried an undertone that might have been resentment or might have been resignation. "I don't suppose you'd be interested in discussing some collaboration opportunities? Pinnacle has some overflow work that might benefit from your particular expertise." The audacity was breathtaking. After years of appropriating my strategic thinking, he was now trying to subcontract my services to solve the problems created by my absence. "I appreciate the offer," I said, maintaining my professional composure, "but Hayes Shaw is fully committed to our current client roster. I'm sure you understand the importance of focusing on strategic priorities." Darian's forced smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Well, if your situation changes." "It won't," I said simply. After he walked away, one of the startup founders in our conversation group leaned over to me. "Wasn't that the guy from Pinnacle who used to present at these events? He seems different." "People change," I replied diplomatically, though privately I was thinking that Darian hadn't changed at all. The circumstances around him had simply shifted to reveal what had always been there. 2 days later, Leila forwarded me an article from Portland Business Journal's weekly newsletter, "Pinnacle Marketing Solutions Faces Client Retention Challenges." The brief piece noted that the agency had lost several major accounts over the past quarter and was restructuring their strategic services offering to better meet evolving client needs. Restructuring their strategic services offering was business journalism code for scrambling to replace capabilities they never properly valued. That evening, as I reviewed our projected revenue for the next quarter, numbers that would have been unimaginable during my Pinnacle days, I realized that my success wasn't just about finding better compensation or more respectful colleagues. It was about discovering that my strategic capabilities, when properly supported and fairly valued, could create opportunities that exceeded even my most optimistic career projections. For the first time in my professional life, I was being paid what I was worth. 4 months after launching Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting, I received a text message that stopped me cold in the middle of reviewing quarterly projections. It was from Sam Thorne, the graphic designer who'd worked on many of my campaigns at Pinnacle. "Crystal, can we talk? Something's happened at Pinnacle, and I could really use some advice." We met that evening at a quiet bar in the Hawthorne district, far from the downtown area where we might encounter other industry professionals. Sam looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and the kind of nervous energy that comes from prolonged stress. "They let me go yesterday," he said without preamble, his hands wrapped around his beer like it was an anchor. "Along with 8 other people. Darian called it strategic restructuring, but everyone knows what's really happening." My stomach dropped. Sam, I'm so sorry. How many people total? 15 so far, with rumors that more cuts are coming. He looked at me directly, his expression a mixture of sadness and something that might have been accusation. Crystal, I know this isn't your fault, but the timing is hard to ignore. I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest like a stone. What do you mean? I mean, Pinnacle started hemorrhaging clients right after you left, and now half the staff is looking for work in a market that's already oversaturated with displaced marketing professionals. Sam's voice was careful, controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. Rachel from account management, Tom from copywriting, even Brianna, who's been there for 6 years, all gone. The names hit me like physical blows. These were people I'd worked alongside for 3 years, colleagues who'd covered for me during impossible deadlines and celebrated with me during successful campaign launches. They hadn't been part of Darian's exploitation. They'd been fellow victims of his management style. Are they okay? Are they finding other positions? Sam's laugh was bitter. Rachel's been interviewing for 2 months without any offers. The market's brutal right now, and Pinnacle's reputation has taken such a hit that having it on your resume is almost a liability. He paused, studying my face. But I'm sure you know all about the market conditions, given how well Hayeshaw is doing. The implied criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth I'd been trying not to examine too closely. While I'd been celebrating our success and growing client roster, my former colleagues had been scrambling to find employment in an increasingly competitive landscape. Sam, if there's anything I can do to help, references, networking connections, anything, please let me know. Actually, there is something. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. Darian's been telling people that you took proprietary client information when you left. He's suggesting that Hayeshaw's quick success is based on stolen strategies and confidential client data. Heat flooded my face. That's completely false. Everything we've done has been based on strategic frameworks I developed independently, and we've been scrupulous about avoiding any conflicts with Pinnacle's client relationships. I know that, Sam said quickly. Anyone who actually worked with you knows that. But Darian's desperate, and desperate people say desperate things. I just thought you should know what he's putting out there. The conversation with Sam haunted me for days afterward. I found myself questioning whether my success was worth the collateral damage to people who'd done nothing wrong except work for the wrong company at the wrong time. Leila noticed my distraction during our weekly planning meeting. You seem troubled about something. Want to talk about it? I told her about my conversation with Sam and the guilt I was feeling about Pinnacle's struggles. I know intellectually that Darian's management failures aren't my responsibility, but seeing good people lose their jobs because of decisions I made, it's harder than I expected. Leila listened thoughtfully, then pulled out her laptop. Crystal, I want to show you something that might provide some perspective. She opened a document that looked like financial records. Remember how I mentioned having access to information about Pinnacle's financial situation? These are the company's profit and loss statements for the past 2 years, documents that came out during our divorce proceedings. I studied the numbers, my understanding of the situation shifting with each line item. These bonuses Darian received, they represent almost 40% of the company's profit margin for those quarters. Exactly. While he was claiming budget constraints prevented him from compensating employees fairly, he was extracting enormous bonuses based on work you were doing. Leila's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the underlying anger. The company was profitable enough to support proper compensation for its talent. Darian chose to prioritize his own enrichment instead. She showed me another section of the financial records. Look at the operational expenses. Pinnacle spent more on Darian's business development activities, which included expensive dinners, conference travel, and entertainment expenses, than it did on total salary increases for the entire staff over 2 years. The picture that emerged was of a company that had been systematically underinvesting in its most valuable resource, its people, while the person in charge extracted maximum personal benefit from their work. Crystal, if Pinnacle is failing now, it's not because you took your talents elsewhere. It's because the business model was never sustainable. You can't build a successful agency on exploitation and expect it to survive when your most exploited employees find better opportunities. Despite Leila's logical analysis, I still felt the weight of responsibility for my former colleagues' situations. That weekend, I made a decision that felt both necessary and uncomfortable. I called Darian. "Crystal?" His voice was surprised, maybe even hopeful. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I heard about the layoffs," I said without preamble. "I wanted to talk about the people who are being affected." There was a long pause. "The layoffs are unfortunate, but they're necessary for the company's long-term stability. Darian, these are good people who've been loyal to Pinnacle for years. Sam Thorne, Rachel Martinez, Tom Wilson. They didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of strategic decisions that weren't their responsibility." "You're right," he said quietly, and the admission caught me off guard. They didn't deserve this. But neither did I deserve to have my company's strategic capabilities walk out the door with my most talented employee. His honesty was more unsettling than his usual deflection would have been. "Is that how you see what happened? That I took something that belonged to you?" "I see it as a failure of leadership," Darian said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "My failure. I built a company culture that drove away the talent that made us successful, and now I'm dealing with the consequences." We talked for another 20 minutes, and what emerged was a picture of a man who'd been so focused on protecting his own position that he'd failed to recognize the foundation his success was built on. When I finally hung up, I felt more confused than when I'd called. That evening, I drafted an email to Hayes Shaw's current clients, offering to provide reference letters and networking introductions for qualified marketing professionals who'd been displaced by recent industry changes. It wasn't much, but it felt like something concrete I could do to help people who were suffering from circumstances beyond their control. 3 of our clients responded immediately, expressing interest in interviewing candidates I could recommend. Within 2 weeks, I'd helped place 4 former Pinnacle employees in new positions, including Sam, who joined a growing digital agency with a salary increase and significantly better work-life balance. But the experience taught me something important about the complex realities of professional success. Standing up for yourself and claiming your worth can have consequences that extend far beyond your own situation. The challenge is learning to navigate that complexity while staying true to your principles and taking responsibility for the influence your decisions have on others. 1 year after walking out of Darian's office with my portfolio clutched against my chest, I stood at the podium of the Portland Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 300 marketing professionals gathered for the Pacific Northwest Marketing Association's annual summit. The placard in front of me read, "Crystal Shaw, co-founder Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting, keynote, building sustainable success through authentic leadership." A year ago, I would have been sitting in the audience, watching someone else receive recognition for the kind of strategic thinking I'd been doing in obscurity. Today, I was being asked to share insights about building a business based on mutual respect and equitable value recognition. 18 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I was earning $62,000 annually, while generating over $8 million in revenue for my employer. I believed that loyalty and hard work would eventually be rewarded, even when evidence suggested otherwise. Today, Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting has 12 team members, 15 major clients, and projected revenue of $2.8 million for our second year of operation. I paused, letting the numbers settle with the audience. But this isn't really a story about business success. It's about the moment when you stop accepting less than your worth and start building something that reflects your actual value. The journey to that podium had been more complex than I could have imagined when I first called Leila Hayes 15 months earlier. Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting had exceeded even our most optimistic projections. What had started as a partnership born from mutual frustration with exploitation had evolved into something much more significant. A model for how creative businesses could operate based on equity, recognition, and shared success. Our team now included 6 former Pinnacle employees, 2 refugees from other exploitative agencies, and 4 recent graduates who'd specifically sought us out because of our reputation for developing talent rather than extracting it. We'd established mentorship programs, implemented profit-sharing structures, and created advancement pathways that prioritized merit over politics. More importantly, We'd begun documenting and sharing our business practices through industry publications, conference presentations, and a quarterly newsletter that had attracted over 5,000 subscribers from marketing professionals across the Pacific Northwest. The most common question I receive, I continued my keynote address, is whether I feel guilty about the impact my departure had on my former colleagues. The answer is complicated. I feel responsible for using my success to help others navigate similar situations, but I don't feel guilty for refusing to subsidize someone else's career advancement with my own undervaluation. That responsibility had manifested in concrete ways over the past year. In addition to helping place displaced Pinnacle employees, Hayes Shaw had partnered with 3 other Portland agencies to create the Strategic Talent Initiative, a collaborative effort to establish industry standards for creative credit, compensation transparency, and ethical talent development. The initiative had gained national attention when we published the Portland Protocol, a framework for agencies wanting to implement equitable practices around intellectual property, strategic development, and performance-based advancement. 16 agencies across 5 states had adopted some version of our recommendations, and 2 business schools had incorporated our case studies into their entrepreneurship curricula. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition had come from an unexpected source: the clients whose trust had made our success possible. Gwenor Wild from Meridian Technologies had nominated Hayes Shaw for the Portland Business Journal's Emerging Business of the Year award, citing our innovative approach to strategic consulting that prioritizes authentic collaboration over traditional agency hierarchies. When we won the award 6 months earlier, Gwenor had insisted on presenting it to us personally. "What Crystal and Leila have built," she'd said during the awards ceremony, "represents the future of professional services. They've proven that businesses can be both profitable and ethical, both innovative and equitable." The awards sat in our conference room now, alongside thank you notes from team members who'd been promoted, clients who'd exceeded their growth targets, and industry colleagues who'd found inspiration in our approach to building sustainable success. But success had also brought unexpected challenges that had tested my understanding of leadership and responsibility. 8 months into our first year, we'd received an acquisition offer from Torvin & Associates. Kelvin Reed, who'd originally introduced me to Leila, had approached us about merging our operations with his agency's existing services, offering immediate scale and financial security that would have made all of us wealthy. "It's a generous offer," Leila had said during our partnership meeting to discuss the proposal. "We'd retain creative control, keep our team intact, and gain access to enterprise-level clients we couldn't reach independently." I'd spent 2 weeks considering the offer, analyzing the financial benefits and strategic opportunities it would provide. But ultimately I'd realized that accepting it would mean returning to a model where our success depended on someone else's leadership decisions, someone else's priorities, someone else's definition of value. "We didn't build this to get rich quick," I'd told Leila when we made our final decision. "We built it to prove that there's a better way to recognize and reward strategic talent. Selling to a traditional agency, even a good one, would undermine everything we're trying to demonstrate." Leila had smiled when I'd finished explaining my reasoning. "I was hoping you'd say that. Torvin's a good company, but they're still operating from the old paradigm. We're trying to create something new." We'd declined the acquisition offer and instead used the validation it represented to secure a $1.2 million line of credit that allowed us to expand our services and hire additional strategic talent without compromising our founding principles. That decision had led to one of the most satisfying moments of the entire journey. 3 months ago, I'd received a LinkedIn message from Rachel Martinez, one of the former Pinnacle employees who'd been laid off during Darian's restructuring. Rachel had spent 6 months unemployed before finding a position with a Seattle agency, but she'd been following Hayes Shaw's growth through industry publications. "Crystal," her message had read, "I know this might be presumptuous, but Hayes Shaw represents everything I'd hoped to find in a marketing career. If you ever have openings for senior account management, I'd love to be considered." Rachel had joined our team 2 weeks later as Director of Client Relations, bringing her 6 years of experience and her deep understanding of what it meant to be undervalued in a professional setting. During her first month, she developed client retention protocols that had improved our satisfaction ratings by 15% and had volunteered to lead our mentorship program for recent graduates. "Working here feels like what I always thought a marketing career should feel like," she'd told me during her 30-day review. "Creative, collaborative, and built on mutual respect rather than fear." But the most profound transformation had been my evolving relationship with the situation I'd left behind. 6 months ago, I'd received an unexpected phone call from Darian. His voice had been different, smaller, more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. "Crystal, I wanted to let you know that I'm closing Pinnacle," he'd said without preamble. "I've been in denial about the financial situation for months, but it's time to face reality." The news had hit me with a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for the end of something that had once held promise, relief that the uncertainty was over, and unexpected sympathy for someone who'd lost everything while trying to protect what he'd thought was his. "I'm sorry to hear that," I'd said, and meant it. "What will you do now?" "I'm not sure yet. Maybe consulting, maybe something completely different." There had been a long pause. "Crystal, I need to say something that I should have said a long time ago. You were the most talented strategist I ever worked with, and I let my own insecurities destroy something that could have been extraordinary for both of us." His apology had been more meaningful than I'd expected, not because it changed what had happened, but because it demonstrated a level of self-awareness that suggested genuine growth. "Darian, we both learned important lessons from that experience. I hope you find a situation that allows you to apply those lessons constructively." "I hope so too," he'd replied. "And, Crystal, what you've built with Hayes Shaw, it's impressive. I've been following your success, and I want you to know that I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished." That conversation had provided a form of closure I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was recognition that people can change and that even painful experiences can contribute to positive growth. Standing at that podium, looking out at faces that reflected the same hopes and frustrations I'd once carried, I concluded my keynote with the most important lesson I'd learned throughout this journey. The decision to value yourself appropriately isn't just about personal success, I said, my voice carrying the conviction that had grown from 18 months of living these principles. It's about creating space for others to do the same. When you accept less than your worth, you're not just undervaluing yourself. You're perpetuating systems that undervalue everyone. I paused, making eye contact with audience members who were leaning forward, engaged with the message. Every time you negotiate fair compensation, every time you insist on proper credit for your work, every time you walk away from situations that don't serve your growth, you're making it easier for the next person to do the same. Your individual choices contribute to collective change. The applause that followed was sustained and energetic. But more meaningful were the conversations that happened afterward. Marketing professionals who'd been accepting substandard treatment, young graduates who needed encouragement to advocate for themselves, and established professionals who were considering their own entrepreneurial journeys. "Thank you for sharing your story," said Hyacinth Sterling, a young strategist who'd approached me after the presentation. "I've been struggling with a situation similar to what you described at Pinnacle. This gave me the courage to start planning my exit strategy." "Document everything," I'd told her, sharing my business card. "Know your worth, prove your value, and remember that loyalty should flow both ways. If you need references or advice during your transition, don't hesitate to reach out." That evening, as I sat in my home office reviewing follow-up emails from conference attendees, I reflected on how profoundly my life had changed since that day in Darian's office, when he'd laughed at my request for a 20% raise. Hayes Shaw Strategic Consulting had grown from a partnership born of frustration into a business that employed 15 people, served clients across multiple industries, and had become a case study for ethical business practices. More importantly, it had created a model that other professionals could adapt to their own situations and industries. But the real measure of success wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I'd helped create opportunities for others to experience the recognition and compensation they deserved. If you're watching this and questioning your own value in your workplace, remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by what you contribute and what the market will pay for those contributions. Document your achievements, research your market value, and never apologize for insisting on fair treatment. And if you're in a position to influence how others are treated, whether as a manager, business owner, or team leader, remember that your decisions about recognition and compensation don't just affect individual careers. They contribute to the culture that determines whether talented people thrive or simply survive. 18 months ago, I thought success meant finally getting recognition from people who'd been exploiting my contributions. Today, I understand that real success means building something that makes exploitation impossible, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The algorithms I'd once developed might have been complex, but the lesson was simple. Know your worth, document your value, and never settle for less than you deserve. Because when you value yourself appropriately, you create space for others to do the same. And that's how individual courage becomes collective change. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear that their contributions matter, and their worth isn't negotiable. Leave a comment telling me about a time you stood up for your own value, or ask questions about navigating workplace challenges. Because your story matters, your contributions have value, and you deserve to be recognized for what you bring to the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.